It's 4:02. So Tui asked me if I would sort of run this meeting. So I'm going to do that now and call it to order. And I'm to follow our process. I'm going to have a very tiny little roll call. Nancy,
Here.
Joe,
Here.
and Polly is here. Before we dive into our thing, did you receive the copy of the minutes from our last meeting? I would love to. I just don't want to fall behind with this administrative end of things. If you've had a chance to read them and have anything to add, let's do that now, or go ahead and approve. It's up to you all.
Yeah, I just read them. So the only thing that I would like to be added was they're great otherwise, but I just read them 5 minutes ago.
Yeah, no, I figured you might not even have a chance. So,
No, I have plenty of time, but I said NFL asked about the status of the content working group because she had just heard, and then in parentheses from someone outside the subcommittee, that on Tuesday, February 4th, the content working group met, though not in a public meeting, and they agreed to disband.
Okay.
So I think that's a really
fair
important
enough.
development.
I had neglected to put that in. So tell me where would you
I think it happened at the beginning. We had this category
under
of
the sort of
whatever we call it. And I can send that to you because I wrote it out.
okay, if you would, that would be very helpful.
Sure.
That would be
I
very,
will.
and this is the minutes of February 6th. Yes, because
That was last week, right? Yep. Okay.
Yep. That would be great. And
Okay. I'll do that right when we hang up.
okay.
But otherwise, it was great. They're great.
On the next one, just to prepare you, is going to be even shorter because Terry indicated that I'm finding that if I'm taking notes, it's not as easy for me to participate, and so I'm trying to focus on participating in this working group.
Yeah.
So you don't need to take notes, but
Yeah.
I need to take minutes. But
yeah, this is a real discussion. It's going to be hard to concentrate. Right. I understand. Yeah.
Joe, did you have anything to change or add?
No changes. I would move to accept the minutes.
Okay, as amended with Nancy's correction.
Correct.
Okay, all in favor?
Aye.
Aye. And I think that's great. Thank you. Okay, so now let's talk about our presentation. So Nancy, I don't know if you had time to look at the draft.
I did. I haven't had a lot of time, but I did just read it. So I've read through it, but it'll be, interesting to just go through it.
Yeah,
that's what you're going to do, right?
Yes, that's what I was thinking. I mean, unless someone has a better idea. I was thinking.
Right, and I did print it out. So
the background is Joe and I met earlier this week. Joe had started with a lot of these great ideas, and we kind of went through them together for a while, and this is where we are right now. And Joe, do you want to sort of walk us through the
I think it would
outline?
Be right. I think it would be useful if I just said, what is the big picture? Because when we start filling out this outline, you can get bogged down in individual pieces and lose sight of, okay, what is this thing about? And one of the real challenges I think we have is to compress what we have to say into a cogent statement, but it gives people enough information to, productively contribute to a discussion. So here's how I see the presentation going, just verbalizing it, and then it's been broken down into many pieces in the outline. But we open the meeting and say, we're here to share what we have done, and we're also here to ask for input. We have three components to our memorial. One is the 250 trees. We give a brief overview of how successful that's been, the archives project, and then we also have this third element, the memorial park. And what we'd like to do is solicit input from people on that memorial park. I think the other two assignments are going smoothly with lots of public support. So the first thing in that memorial park would be, we'd review our mission. Second, we'd review decisions that were made about the site itself, site selection. We'll review the landscape proposal, the things we're suggesting from the point of view of landscape improvements. And those three things Nancy at the last meeting said, well, gee, those are sort of things everybody agrees with, but I think it's useful to go through those. And then fourth thing would be to explain the design elements, the timeline wall and the stele, and say, here's what they are. Now, let's have a discussion about rethinking the design. And so everything that I said up to that point of saying, let's rethink the design, I think we have to make very compact and as a, a preamble to the real meat of the meeting that we're having with whatever group is we want to rethink the design with you of these elements. There's not much controversy about the park elements. There's not much controversy about the mission or the site, but there is about the design. And one of the big issues is not just that some folks don't think positively about it, but there's also a funding shortfall in terms of getting content and advancing the design. It would be sort of still in the water. So it's a perfect time to revisit. And then, in my mind, I think it would be useful to give some background about the different types of memorials that the committee had identified. We had said there's sort of architectural types, there are sculptural types, there are types that are placemaking, some that have narratives, some that don't. And those are not pure categories. You can have an architectural memorial with narrative, with elements to it. You can have any combination of those things, placemaking with sculpture, so forth. So they're not pure, but it's an analytical way of thinking about it and talking about it that gives people, a framework. So with that little background, we could then say one of the big decisions we had to make that significantly affected the design was the decision to include narratives about the individuals that we were trying to bring forward as contributors to the whole theme of social justice and individual freedom. And I remember the word we used to always say is telling the stories, and it became sort of a literal thing. And I think that if you take that point of view, you've got to devote a significant amount of surface area to these stories. So narratives require a tablet of some kind, whether it's flat on the ground or tilted at an angle or standing up vertically, it's got to have a surface. And we can then talk about the sort of on the other end of the spectrum of something that is discursive and narrative is something that's not that, but it's a image or a sculptural element that signifies something. I was having a conversation with Polly earlier this week, Nancy, and I was saying on the one hand, you can have the American flag, which is a symbol that it doesn't say what it means, but people, assign meaning to it. And one of those meanings is this whole subject of, democracy based on individual freedom. And then on the other hand, you have the Declaration of Independence, which is a discursive thing. It's very precise about what it says. And they are about the same thing. They're just different ways of expressing that. One you might say is the more symbolic and the artistic and the non-discursive versus a discursive recitation of the same thing. And it's sort of like what we're facing with this memorial. And I think what we want to try to get at is what people think about what this memorial should be. And are we on the right track with this narrative thing, or is that just taking us down a road with lots of problems? And should we be taking a different track? And it would be nice. And so that's as far as we've taken it, Nancy. And it's spelled out a little bit more in the expanded outline. But I think getting to that last thing about how we present what we need to present to a group of people who have not been immersed in this, to help us rethink the design. Where, what's going to be a stimulating way for us to do that? And I think that's still in the thinking stage, right, Polly?
I would say so, yeah. Yeah. And I think and I also think it's really going to be difficult for people to have a constructive conversation about it without the background of how do we get where we are now. And so while I think we need to make every effort to condense that and back it up. I like Nancy's idea of having something available so people can be following along or reading in advance or, getting a little more information before we get to those sessions. But it's not going to be something we can do in 3 minutes because we've spent so much time on this and there's been a lot of thinking that's gone into it. And I don't think any of us are wanting to go back to, the very, very, very first steps of this whole thing. We've made, some good progress. And I think the way you frame it, Joe, is really helpful. And I think showing some examples that we looked at, now a couple of years ago would be instructive. And I think we can go through those pretty quickly. I really do.
Agreed. Yeah, we can do
And
a lot with a well scripted
Yeah.
series of visuals. Yeah.
Mhm. Mhm.
Okay, I like your presentation. I'm kind of glad that Ellen, I had no idea they were going to be here, but it's good to have sort of an audience because they're the kind of people that you're going to be reaching out to, the audience. And in a way, I am too, because I've been the most, oppositional to the design. So,
And you
Right.
joined more recently too. You haven't had
Right.
the deep discussions that the rest of us had.
Right, because I joined the commission late, the subcommittee late, right. So I made some notes and I was your email to us that included this document raised some important questions that I think factor into what we're talking about. Like, how long, the basic question is how long each meeting is going to be or discussion group. Because we should start with that, thinking about how long we're going to ask people to meet with, because then we want to make sure that the presentation is in proportion to the amount of time that we have left for discussion.
Right.
And because that was my initial worry, was that if we're going to go back and do the same thing that we had done in the public forum, it's kind of starting over again rather than coming to a midpoint. But I absolutely agree. People need to be given a framework. I mean,
And we hope there'll be new people involved in each of
I
these. And
don't
maybe
disagree with
sessions will
that at
be
all. It's just how do you do that and still allow for a discussion? So I think that would be, we do need to think about the format of of how and where they're going to be held, who they're, how many. Another important question for me is how many people in a group, any discussion group, because one of the things that you had was, when you're questioning what the format will be, whether there'll be breakout groups.
right.
So if you
And-
have 30 people, you don't want a whole group discussion because then that's not an intimate sort of real idea generating format. So maybe, we should, as a subcommittee, say these are really going to be targeted. I don't know if everyone will agree with that. I see it as more smaller groups, 10, 12 people, because it's like you go to town meeting, you go and a major part of town meeting is listening to what everyone's saying so that you hear a lot of different sides. Is that Tui?
Is it?
Yes, Tui
Just
came on.
joined.
Joey.
I've been
Joey.
sternly advised by my wife not to do anything substantive. So I'm just going to listen. I'm on a wonderful concoction of drugs. I have a new hip. I'm walking better already, but I'm
Amazing.
dying. I loved what you two put together, and I just couldn't stay away from this. So I'll just quietly listen and
We're just glad you're okay. That's what I'm most
That
happy.
is so
You made it
great.
through. I'm
no,
happy.
I'm not okay. I'm better, except for
Yes.
my mind is you may see me close my eyes periodically because oxycodone is really a powerful drug. But anyway,
You
continue.
can go back.
Oh, we're so glad
It's
you're.
great to see you.
Thank you all. I
Great to
feel
see you.
in the warm embrace of you all. So, but do continue. And Polly and Joe, I really, what you put together, it just reminded me, it's very nice to have a very experienced and true professional who understands these kinds of things. So my hat's off to you, Joe.
But we're
Anyway,
gonna want
Polly,
we're gonna want a demonstration of that new hip at the next meeting.
okay. A little samba dancing,
Yeah,
perhaps.
yeah, something along.
Yeah. I think that proves, Joe, that Laura may have been right about advising me not to join the meeting. All right, carry
Great to
on,
see you.
please.
Thank you, Tui, and don't feel you need to stick around if you.
Okay, no, great.
Pop off,
But
but it's
I'm
good.
nodding my head as Nancy's talking. I think your points are very well taken, and the idea of smaller groups where you can actually get some interaction, it would be much better. And especially if we can somehow compose those groups, it would be great to.
Well, yeah, I mean, I guess I didn't finish my thought. It was just that if, it's a town meeting, then you have a room full of, however many hundreds of people and everybody can hear. But if you break out into smaller groups, then you can't hear maybe, what someone else at another table is saying. So I don't know. We haven't discussed who the groups are that we're going to reach out to. So we have to figure all that out.
I agree with you, Nancy. I think that's a really key thing because you
Mhm.
want to know who your audience is when you're putting together a presentation like
Right.
this. I think one goal should be to make it as flexible as possible so that
Mhm.
if we have, say, a group of half a dozen high school students,
Yeah.
it'd be nice not to have to reinvent it each time we take the show on the road. And I think we could have, literally take out some plans, put them on a table, look at this, you could really get into the details with a small group. I can also imagine a larger group where we might want to be ready to have some kind of a more facilitated Q&A, if it's an unwieldy for a real conversation,
Mhm.
but I think both could work. And I mean, there are people who we might be able to get to come and help us with that. But I agree with both of you that small would be really nice because I think we could get, but getting the right people in the room is just another thing that I'm so aware, like we really need to figure out how we're going to target the audiences, the people who we haven't heard from and people who might be interested, but haven't heard about it yet.
Right.
More people, more minds is always better, I think. So,
Mhm.
So that's a whole other body of work. It isn't really directly related to preparing this presentation, but it's really important and it's impossible not to think about it.
Well, when you're preparing the presentation, you're thinking about who the audience is. So, and the audience could be, could be small groups and a larger group. So then you might want to tell her, okay, so that's enough of that. We can now get to the content, I think. So, you had said, I mean, this is just like, maybe we don't even need to say things like this, but even talking about the other projects that we've done, the 250 tree is, you want to mention that, but you don't want to, that's going to eat up time. So I think it's great to mention
like
it.
60 seconds on each one,
Yeah, exactly.
And honestly,
Right.
I feel like I can't right now say I have a good sense of where we are with the trees. I could write 60 seconds on that easily. It'd probably be hard to make it 60 seconds. The archival research project, I'm not so clear about what's exactly happened. So I don't know if there's somebody we could ask to just give us a little summary. My understanding is it led to hi, Laura. You keeping an eye on things? My understanding is that it led to the discovery of these, whether it's 19 or 22 names of people with links who as I understand, are enrolled to fight in the American Revolution, enlisted here in Concord. I think that came out of that research. That's my understanding, but I'm not even 100% sure that that's the case. So,
wait a minute, I was thinking about something else. Say that again. Can you just say that again?
My understanding was that Beth, no.
Yeah, but she did that with the Education and History Committee. That doesn't have anything to do
Oh,
with
it
the
doesn't have,
archival
okay, see,
research.
okay,
I
so there
think the
you go.
archival research and yeah, and you're right, because we don't know enough about that. I think that wasn't that about digitizing things at
It was
special
about
collections that weren't,
processing the records in special
yeah.
collections, not
So I
necessarily
think they're two
digitizing.
separate projects. I could be wrong, but that's my understanding.
Okay. So there's, I don't even know who to ask about that
I
project.
can ask Beth, but well, Gary, because I thought it was his idea
Yeah, it
to
was his idea.
digitize, and he worked with Anka. So, and I
Maybe
can,
Anka's the one to
I can
ask
ask
next.
Anka. Yeah, I can
That,
email
I
her.
think that would be great. Might as well get it.
Sure.
I think Gary is so,
Yeah, let me
he's
just
trying to
make
make
sure
sure that.
and yeah, and see if it's done and how long it took and who did it, not just so we can give
And
credit to that.
maybe a couple of little wonderful treasures that were found or unearthed or.
Right.
That would be, but I think literally it's got to be just a little
Yeah.
in our presentation.
Okay.
We're really here to talk about the park. So, Nancy, did you feel in the sort of script that we've started to work on here that we're making, I mean, I hope that it's really clear that we want feedback, that we're open-minded. We reach the decisions that you know, we reached the design that we have in a thoughtful, following a thoughtful process and after a lot of good consideration, and we think it has value, and we're open-minded, and we're not, it's not, you know, we want more feedback and more input. I want to make sure that that comes through, because if it doesn't, there's no point in doing these. You know,
I think it does come through, I guess. Again, I've just read this in the last hour, so I haven't had enough time to really absorb it. Like I love some of the monuments you showed, Joe, like the Martin Puryear and the Kehinde Wiley. I'm not familiar with those. So I want to I'm gonna go, I will look into those more. I think, this important part about the narrative versus imagery is critical. And I think, what do I want to say this? I think people are going to want to know how committed we are, how committed the subcommittee is to the design. Because even in our committee, we have two members who are on the fence about it. And so how are we going to keep ourselves open to that idea? Because we're going to spend time talking about these elements and discuss it. What do people say? I think we have to be prepared for questions. We have to anticipate questions. So telling people that we talked about stories, which we really want to, teach people about, educate, use the word educate. I have a lot of thoughts and I'm rambling, but my niece is with us. She's 26 years old. She's a traveling nurse. And we were just ate dinner and I asked her, I was asking her what monuments and memorials stick out in her mind. And she gave some examples. And I promise I did not prod her at all. She said the Lincoln Memorial. And I said to her, what is it that you liked about the Lincoln Memorial? And she said, the scale of it and the sculpture. And she said, yeah, there was writing, but I don't remember. I didn't say anything. I said, did you remember it? She herself said, and there's text, but I don't remember what it was. And that had come up in our discussion the last time. And so, in my mind, I'm thinking when people come to Concord, as we all know, I mean, we think about this a lot. What do people first see? What are the impressions they get? And what are the impressions they take away with them? What are things that people remember about monuments and memorials? And all along, I love all the stories, but I'm not sure that in a memorial you want a visual impact. And I've talked to someone that was on the content working group, and that person too said that was a problem for her.
Well, I
So,
think that's why that's really why we're doing this, right?
yeah,
And we
yeah,
we made that decision however
yeah,
many months ago
yeah.
or more for, I think, very, good reasons, but it
Mhm.
might not be the right decision. And so that's why we're doing this.
I know, but
Um,
I'm thinking of the next step because people are saying, okay, what happens if, what if you get a lot of people saying that,
well, then you
then
have a
what are
whole
we
other,
going to do?
right.
Well, I
You
It's
have
think
gonna
a,
that
cause a problem.
I think it,
I don't think it's a problem. I think
Okay.
that if the general consensus is that a memorable object with high artistic value is the direction to go for Concord in 2025, then I think the committee has to say, okay, great. What do you want us to do next? And we're going to have to ask
Mm,
ourselves, what do we do
okay,
next? And we're going to have to engage an artist, and that's going to involve a process of interviewing people with
right.
relevant
I
credentials
understand. Yeah,
and bringing to the table uh, someone who has the ability to do the project to the community's satisfaction.
right.
And I think that person will have to work with a landscape architect. Every
Mhm.
time I've worked with an artist, they are not good landscape architects. They don't know how
Right.
to put their places in the
I
environment.
understand. Yep.
But they work together beautifully, and we've done many projects with sculptors that uh, are integrated with a setting. So I think what we would reach a point where you would say, okay, there has to be this new enterprise that it has to be taken on. And whether you're going to do that with volunteers or whether the select board has to allocate or the town clerk has to allocate some money to go out and conduct this search and get this person and find out. Once you find out who you want, then you're going to have to find out how much it's going to cost.
Right. I
Uh,
know that is the next
and
step.
and then but that's where it goes very quickly.
Right. Right.
I don't
Okay.
think there's a problem getting to that if that's what
Okay.
we hear from the
Okay.
groups.
Yeah.
Because I
and
think the
I think you need,
groups
yeah,
could
I think
do a
we need
number
also,
of different things. Yeah,
I was
one
just
of them
gonna,
would be to basically say, we don't want this narrative kind of thing. And as much as it's a value, maybe there's another way we can handle that other than in a permanent memorial. But if the direction shifts, I just think that we've got to slide with it. That's what we're asking, and that's what we should be doing.
yeah. And I think that then begs the question, is the statement of purpose as we have it a static thing? I had sort of felt like it really was. And if we decide that we really want something that's more symbolic and less literary, um, it still needs to respond to I mean, unless we get a lot of feedback saying, well, that's a terrible purpose. You should be doing something totally different, which I don't think we're going to hear that. We haven't heard that at all yet.
Right.
Um, but then I wonder how, I mean, this is, maybe we're getting ahead of ourselves here a little bit, but
Mhm.
the process, you look at Kehinde Wiley and, they're so completely different from one another. And some people love one style, some people love another style. There's not going to be the perfect, I don't think. I mean, I think Kate can be super helpful in pointing us in different directions here, but that's going to be a whole other challenge, which if we get there, we'll have to deal with that.
Yeah.
Yeah, I
I know
think as
we've
far
talked
as
a
the
lot about
mission
that.
statement goes, I think the mission statement, you could say that it's fundamentally about recognizing people who haven't been recognized um, for their work in the field
Mhm.
of social justice. And I think you could then say that this symbolic image or element has to, as part of it, recognize these people. Just like the Civil War monument says something powerfully and architecturally, but it also has that little plate on the bottom with all the names. And it
Mhm.
has, so somehow you'd have to include the names and
Yeah.
probably not more than a uh, a, a brief descriptor,
Mhm.
you know, feminist, civil
Mhm.
rights advocate, whatever the title is, could be there, and that would not be telling the story, but it would be pointing people in the right direction, that there was this civil rights activist, Ellen Garrison, who lived and worked in Concord and became a national figure. But you're not seeking at that moment to inform them about, Garrison or any of the others we've talked about, Alcott, Thoreau.
Yeah, and you could send them, you could send them to a place where they could learn more. With the internet, we have all sorts of, we have the ability to do
Yeah,
that
yeah.
we couldn't do a few decades ago. I want to keep us moving forward because this is
Yeah, I'm seeing it's, yeah, it's 4:30.
it's
Okay.
4:30, and I know one of the things that we need to decide is our sort of pace. Like, we've taken it this far now. There's more clearly that we need to do. I think we need to think about literally the script for each of the points that we're doing, which a lot of that is here, I think. But then also, if it's going to be a PowerPoint, whatever visual cues we're going to have, as whoever's speaking, that's going to take a little work. And then also, what happens after this? So we've laid this out, and then how do we solicit input and creative ideas and get a really good, fruitful conversation going? Which isn't so much a presentation. That's more a, another part of the gathering, I think. But
So I had just two comments, because
Yeah.
I like most of what's in here. There's nothing not to like. It's more what's not in here that I'm worried about. One of the things that I think is a problem is that, for number one, the indigenous component, that I think it's another thing that we need to anticipate. People are going to say, well, number one, why isn't an indigenous person involved in the design? Because, now there's so many designs that are coming out that do have that. And people keep saying that in Concord, and it's hard to get that. I understand that myself, but so I've needed to have that too in projects that I've worked on. So it's not easy, but that's a comment that's going to come up. And because that's a really important, we're trying to, the mission statement says we're trying to highlight all of these untold stories. That's a huge untold story in Concord. Not many people know that. And so a timeline, yes, that visual, you make the point that the timeline is a visual evocation of that, but is that enough for people who are walking through, to a visitor coming? Will they understand that? There's still going to have to be an explanatory sign, I think, explaining what the timeline represents, because so many people just don't know that. So that's one thing that kind of concerns me, that if you're going to have narrative stories, that's one that might be missing. If you have the stelae, you have subjects on the stelae, will there be one dedicated to that history, or is it in your mind? I mean, Joe, you designed it. Is the timeline what tells that part of that story?
Yeah,
The other thing that is not in here yet is, we've agreed to put into our mission statement that we're going to tell the stories of the 21 revolutionary fallen war heroes. And you guys might not know, but I listened to the historic coffee morning yesterday, and Beth has now uncovered another person. Breaking news. And it's really interesting because it's a person she knew the name, but she thought it was an Acton person, and Acton has done work on that person, but now she's found a connection to Concord. So that's a little bit of a breaking news. So that's not in your presentation. And I think that's a question that people are going to want to know is that how is that going to be included in this monument? It's a question that I myself can't answer. And I just
What,
want to quickly tell you something. I don't know if you've been to the Concord Museum, their current exhibition about, I think Tui, I told you about this, their current exhibition about portraiture. One of the most prominent piece in that exhibition is this photograph of Jack Garrison. And I made the cradles for the exhibition, but I had never read the label. And on the back of that photograph, it tells a story that I didn't know about Jack Garrison. And it's the person who gave that, it's a calling card in 1913, wrote this story about Jack Garrison saying that he, when he would go into people's houses to do work, so he was very well known in Concord, and the population was small, that when people would have visitors from the South, he would hide. And that's just a really important story that just opens up all kinds of questions. So I just wanted to tell you guys that because it's, you know,
Yeah.
it's also breaking news and kinds in that we're still digging up there's still stories to be told.
Well, and I
So,
think it's a fact that we're going to be digging up stories for a long, long
right, right.
decade to decade
So
stories.
I guess that's part of the problem with the narrative is that you know you can only choose a few things. So, but yeah, so I think that's missing in the what you want, what the commission, what the subcommittee thinks about this Rev War piece that we've.
Well,
now
and in fact,
I
I don't
think
think anywhere in here do we mention specific names that we've discussed in terms of
Right.
whose stories we would be telling, which
Right.
I think is an omission. It also could become a great, it could become the topic, which I think we're trying to avoid because we want to get we want to go back a little bit further to make sure this is the right approach. So, but yeah, I that occurred to me also
Okay.
that there's no mention in here of the and then we also know people are going to ask about the Thoreau plaque, which is
Right.
another
Right.
thing that has come up and so actually thinking of questions that will come up and knowing, agreeing on what the right response is, I think would be helpful. And it may be that we don't know yet. We don't know yet how that's going to be handled or, but how much detail do we want to go in? I mean, we've talked about, some very specific names for these who could be featured in these stelae, but we haven't made that final decision because we've been waiting for the content group, and now I don't know the story behind that, but if that's not happening anymore, we really are at this place where we're like at a pause, and it's a good time to be.
I don't hate to bring it up because I think it's critical that we talk about that because we were depending on that information to round out what we're trying to do, and now we don't have that. I just think that as a subcommittee, all the members need to hear more information about that. We haven't even been told as a subcommittee that happened. I brought that up because I just happened to
I think we should talk
discover
about
it. So I think Joe Palumbo is going to have to come, at the next meeting that he comes to be open and tell us what happened, and then say and then ask what are we going to do about that? What's the what's going to what if we're going to have another group or how we're going to handle that.
So let
I
me,
think that it's interesting that I think that when we make this presentation, the discussion is probably going to parallel the one we're having right now, where on one hand,
Yep.
if you do symbolic things, you're talking about artists and all kinds of, appropriate expressions and so forth, and the range from, the Liberty Cap to Kehinde Wiley's mounted black boy. And then if you choose the other, where we say, no, the narratives are great. We love to be able to tell stories that it's so intimate, it's so Concord. It's whereas the symbol thing, it's not specific to Concord as much as words would be, and Concord is known for words. Then you're going to have to find a word group.
a word artist.
Yeah, so you either are going to be looking for a image artist or a word artist. So in either case, we need an artist. And then with the word artist, you would have to then have the double problem of saying, okay, the words aren't going to float in thin air. They've got to be on something.
Yeah.
What is that thing? And where does that come from? And, we can have a long discussion about that.
So I'm breaking my rule and chiming in, but Nancy, there are a couple of things you raised that are very good questions. When you mentioned your niece talking about scale, and this relates to what Joe hit on perfectly, we have not only a complicated site, but we have a complicated mission. We want to keep the site as open and reflective as possible, and yet we want to bring forward the words. And as I've said consistently, this Sasaki conceptual design really addressed that dual issue. But where we're going now, for instance, when your niece mentions scale, I love the Lincoln Memorial. I love the Embrace, but I think we can agree that even if we go whole hog to fill that space, we're not going to have anything of nearly that kind of scale, nor have the money to
Right.
purchase something that size. So
Right.
but that brings us to the question of what Joe is saying. What is our mission in the site? And it's not only going to have to do with the specific kind of representation we have, but also how we manage that site. Are we going to continue? And this takes us right back to the beginning to holding on to this dual mission of reflective space and a memorial, which is what we have, which Sasaki addressed. And I want to say very well. But if we are, that also influences, or I should back it around to what Joe said. If we decide to have more of a, a physical memorial sort of statue, sculpture, something different from what we have now, that may alter how we approach that space. And these are, I think, these get at some of the questions that we might want the public to be weighing in on. And Nancy, I'm going to ask you, you've come up with a lot of great ideas, and I think I know in my mind, I use you as a counterpoint because I'm looking, I'm looking and going, oh, this is great. And you have all these very specific things. I'm going to ask you to try to make a list so that's sort of organized in your mind that you can present of the things that you're talking about. They're great things, and it's good to have it sort of an organized list that you could send to us and it could be factored in as one thing and would
Okay.
help this going on. And I want to, as it's now quarter of, I just want to raise the question to Joe and Polly, since you have created this amazing thing. Do you feel that if we had next week with the four of us to talk about this and refine it, because I think Joe, you're right that the meeting we have with the full group will very much sound like what we're doing now. But if we can refine this dual path that is being sussed out of this, and dual path also with respect to keeping the same mission now, reflective, a dual use for the space, or maybe not. If we can refine that a bit, it makes sense to me to do that and not go to the full group next week. In other words, I think we could use more time on this. But again, I think I've started with that premise, but you've done a lot of work. What are your thoughts, Polly and Joe, about our next steps with respect to the full group?
I haven't,
feel like we can go either way, depending on, I mean, it won't be as well baked if we take it to the full group next week, but that might be a good thing. I don't know. What do you think, Joe?
on the other hand, if we air even what we have with some refinements to the whole group, we start to perhaps get a sense of whether we're on the right track, and whether others have ideas that could reinforce or redirect what we're thinking. I would like to have the whole group think that, okay, what you've presented as this approach is something that the whole subcommittee stands behind, and then enlist them to help us answer those questions that we were talking about in the very beginning. And who are we presenting this to? How do we tailor it? I wouldn't want to go too much further without knowing who we're presenting to.
I think that's
And whether
really
that's, and we may have to have multiple versions of this depending on who you're talking to. I'd like to have them weigh in on whether we do large group assemblies and breakout groups or small groups. I mean, the latter is superior, but it's labor intensive if you get into a lot of them. But that may be what's necessary.
And also, I think developing maybe even almost a single page, something that we could put on the Facebook or Instagram with a short list of questions at the end to try to garner some additional feedback that way, which would be striking at a very different group. Maybe not, because you still have to go on to the Instagram for the 250th to go there, and not everybody's going on that. That's not on everybody's radar. So anyway, well, that seems that those are good points, and that and I sort of I feel that I don't want to waste the time of the other three, but yes, we're a group, and I would like to get their feedback. So why don't I'll put together the agenda, or maybe Polly, you'd like to. It's very simple. It's the same. I'll do it and run it by you. For next week, that we try to actually meet. I guess still it has to be on Zoom, but meet at 5. Nancy, are you back next week?
no, but that's okay. Any time is okay because I stay up late, so 9 or 10, it
Well,
doesn't
if
matter.
that,
In fact, the later it better, because if I go out somewhere,
you could be back. Well, that's really up to you, I think, because you'll be the only one out of town. So if 5 works, I'll put it back to 5. I
yeah,
think.
it doesn't matter to me. Yeah.
Okay, thank you. Okay, well then we'll do that. And I'll work on a list too. Maybe we'll communicate between now and then. I'm not going to promise too much over the weekend, but still, and get that your list. If you'd like me to help you with your list, or if we're working together, that would make it easier, because you have a lot of ideas.
I guess I'm not quite sure which, because I could make a lot of different kinds of lists. So I want more specificity, but we were supposed to be, you and I, our piece was to work on questions to ask
Wow.
people. And so I do have some questions here, but they're really, and that, Polly, I think you had said, how are we going to reach people? A questionnaire was on there. And I was thinking, there's so many ways that you can draw people in, but again, we need to decide the basics, where the meetings are going to be, who it's going to be giving the presentations, all of that. And so, and I don't love questionnaires. I've been in committees where you have a questionnaire and then they do it statistically. I don't like that. But what I do like is sending things to people who when we're going to invite groups, saying, okay, we're inviting you, and here's a list of questions for you to think about if you have time before you come. And there are things like, very general, what kind of memorial or monument would you like to see on parcel 1693? What do you, when you have visitors, where do you bring them? Which memorials and monuments things like that, very general things. What impressions do you want your visitors to leave with? Very general things like that. So that's one idea. The other idea is that we could have an article on the bridge to explain what we're doing, because that reaches everybody in Concord.
That's a good.
And then you could tell them, because we don't have an Instagram or Facebook. I don't do any of that. But if you're going to create that, you would want to say you could go and find information, or we put this questionnaire on the 250th website So you could go there and get ideas to think about it, and you could copy that out, and we're not going to collect it, but you could, do it for yourself so that you're coming and you're thinking about this and say, you could look at that Beyond Granite website. You could look at the design, our conceptual design that's on that website. And then I have just one other thing that I've written down, because I, very openly say that I have some differences of opinion about what's been happening in the subcommittee. How is that going to be represented? And Kate might too. I don't talk to Kate, but I know she thinks in a certain way. How is that going to be represented in these presentations? Are we going to say that the whole committee is unified, or are we going to allow for, some middle ground? Like
So
what if I'm not there in the presentation, and you
if
can
you're not,
say
if
one
you're
member
not
is
there,
not.
you get elected chairman. Um, uh, but let us have a separate conversation on all of this, because this is what our
Okay.
work is. And then
Okay.
I'm gonna just say, I think then, given what you said, Joe, and it just makes sense to get everybody back in. Let's do the full group next week. Nancy, if you and I can talk about this as sort of, we can't answer all the questions, but get
Mhm.
a good list, and thank you for making one. We can come together and have sort of an open discussion with what we've got. Joe and Polly, you've got an outline that really gives us something to work with.
Yeah.
It's covered so much of the stuff. And I think having Kate's ideas on that particularly, and who knows if Krista will have the capacity, because we want Krista to stay with the trees, but she's always got great ideas, and of course Joe too. So
Well, and
we'll get,
I think the rest of the committee will have ideas of, I mean, there's some practical considerations with, setting up these meetings and getting the right people there, and how do you reach, so I don't think that this group can do all of that, honestly. I think that we're gonna have to, I mean, Krista has her contacts at the high school. I think we need to do some brainstorming about where we
yeah.
want, because it's gonna take a while to set them up.
Oh
Places
my
are not just
God.
available, and, it's gonna take a couple of months to publicize things and get the date, and,
Well, and Nancy saying what size groups, whatever. I think the answer is all of them. We're developing and really, Joe and Polly, you put this together, but an outline of a presentation that is going to go in a bunch of different directions. We don't even know all the directions. What we do know is what we're going to try to present, how we're going to try to tell our story. That's what we're working on now. And then the ways of getting at the people, honestly, I do feel things like, I think ultimately this is almost like you know, maybe having something in our backyard here and telling a group of people from our community. I'm not getting a high five on that from Laura, but the idea of getting together with friendship group. There's a behind the neighborhood website here that we all talk about, behind the depot, little connected website. I'm thinking things like that to access people who read that, but who may not even
Yeah.
into the 250. So the answer is kind of all of the above. And that's what I'd like to talk to you about, Nancy, with
Okay.
is how do we, Joe and Polly are getting this information together. We're going to keep refining that, but how are we going to find a way to address all those different modalities? And, and as I say, as with kids getting into the job market right now, they're trained for jobs that don't exist yet. We're trying to make a presentation for areas that we don't know about yet. I kind of think.
Yeah, and I was just going to add to that too, that we're trying to we're trying to develop this presentation so that we can tell our story about how we got here in a coherent way. But it's not just so we can tell our story; it's really in order to get
Yeah,
people
thank you.
involved and to get constructive feedback that'll help us strengthen it even more. Strengthen the outcome at
So
the end. That is.
going back to what I felt all along, that we are all, everybody in our meeting rooms are all really want the same thing. So what we're really trying to do is saying, look, we've been charged. Concord wants to have something to celebrate, memorialize the 250th anniversary. It may be the last anniversary of the democracy, who knows? But to celebrate the 250th anniversary, it's all of us are, this is a big deal. So this is your chance. Yeah. So as you're saying, it's your chance, people of Concord, to weigh in on something. We're just the subcommittee appointed to focus it, but it's for everybody. We're all
For
going to.
everybody, and I think it's also important to recognize that we're in a different place than we were when we did this 2 years ago, where we had nothing. We now have something for people to respond to.
Yes. Yeah.
And that is really helpful. Even if we end up going in a different direction, it's really helpful to have something to respond to. We've done a lot of this hard thinking, we've thought out of the box and we've ended up, coming to something that's actually doable, which is not every idea is doable. I mean, I'd
Right.
love to have Kenda Wiley design a gorgeous statue for the spot. I don't think that's going to happen. I don't afford him, but
Right.
anyway.
I mean, there is a possibility that someone could design something equally beautiful, but smaller. I'm always looking at monuments now, and I've been to smaller parks that have smaller imagery sculptures, but I'm not saying that we should do that. I'm just saying that that is possible.
Yeah.
And I
Yeah.
think a question that I'm just going to, you don't have to answer it now, Joe, but I'm in England, the garden land of beautiful gardens and parks. And every time I go to 1693, that's what I envision, some beautiful little park. But I don't know, I'm not a landscape architect. And so I don't know what actually can be done. How much can be done with just plants?
Yeah. And do we want
Question that I
to
have.
Yeah,
we
a
want to
lot
keep
can
it?
be done with plants, and gardens can be beautiful, but maintenance is the only thing that keeps them in place. And when you have a public works department, and like in my town, Belmont or Concord, you don't maintain gardens.
Good
They
answer.
are bare minimum parks.
Okay.
And so, I mean, right, I don't want to throw cold water on it, because I mean, one of the things we looked at early on were garden type memorials, garden
Yeah.
fountain. I mean, there's a beautiful
I know.
garden memorial. I forget the name. It's a Bennett Memorial in Central Park, New York. It's gorgeous.
Mhm.
And, it's got figurative sculpture. It's got calm pools of water, nice benches, beautiful vegetation. But you would need a maintenance endowment to go with that. And I'm not saying it's not possible, but the word permanent sort of hung over our head.
Okay.
And gardens are not permanent unless they're totally funded in perpetuity.
Yeah, but as you know, the permanent memorial, and this is just another permanent memorial in Concord subcommittees have done things in the past that were not permanent. So
Yeah, if we wanted
well, I'll tell you.
Well,
Right.
that's another option. That's
Separately.
another thing to consider. That shall be on your list, I
Yeah,
suppose.
okay.
Although
Right.
it is in our title, so
Yeah, right.
that would feel like a big shift, but
Yeah, but that has been interpreted widely in like 1975. They did other things, but I'll tell you about that later.
All righty. Well, it's 5:00, so we're gonna meet next week. I'm looking at our Joe, you and I guess we'll get to just take this to the next, if we can, maybe add some more.
Yeah, I'm really not going to have a huge amount of time. I will do that with you, but I have a major deadline next Friday, a week from tomorrow,
Oh,
that
wow.
I know I'm going to be focused on
Well,
it.
I'll have some time over the weekend when I'm
Okay.
iced in or whatever is going
I know.
So,
Maybe, yeah.
Your snow days.
okay, and I think that is what we were planning to cover, unless anybody else has any other issues that we
Well,
should
the only thing I'd like to do quickly, since part of this would be rescheduling, is Nancy, would Monday or Tuesday for you be a time we maybe could Zoom or WhatsApp or something? Or we'd have to Zoom, but we could do that.
We could, it would have to be in the later rather than earlier in the morning, because my niece, I'm taking her to the airport
I'm,
Monday
I'm,
morning, and I'm having another visitor on Tuesday, believe it or not. So
I know it's tough timing in general, but
I'm not usually that, yeah.
I'm
But
hanging out all
we'll
day.
find a time. We'll email back and forth. I'll
Okay.
propose some
All right.
times. Okay.
Great.
All right. So
So, yep,
thank
go ahead.
you. Thank you, everybody. And it's 5:02 and I'm going to say that we're adjourned.